This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Anatolian Dispatch, part of the Ahval News family, your best source for information on all things about Turkey. Today we have with us again Dr. Chris Kilford, former colonel in the Canadian Defense Forces and Defense Attaché in Ankara, Turkey, who was also accredited to a number of the neighboring countries. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what has happened since 5 years ago when there was a fortunately failed coup attempt in Turkey. And with that short introduction, I'll turn it over to Dr. Kilford.
Thanks, Ed, and thank you again for the invitation to come on the program with you and talk about things that are happening in Turkey, which I always like to do. And yeah, tomorrow is Democracy and National Unity Day in Turkey, and it's amazing. 5 years have passed, and when you talk to me about this podcast and reflecting on what happened 5 years ago. And I do remember very clearly, I was out for a run. It was the afternoon here in Victoria, British Columbia. And I came back and I popped into the shower, and I got out and my phone was ringing, and it was a friend of mine, and he said, "Are you watching the news right now? There's a military coup going on in Turkey." And I said, well, I was shocked. You know, I think my hands started to shake, and I just was overwhelmed in that particular moment. And so he hung up, and I turned the television on, and I was basically standing there with my towel, and I was dripping wet, and I could see what was happening. And then my cell phone rang, and it was CTV, one of our national television networks, and they said to me, "You know, Chris, there's a coup happening in Turkey right now." And I remember saying, "Yes, I know," which implied that I knew what was going on, which I really didn't. And they said, "Well, can you come on right now, go live and talk to us about what's happening?" And of course I couldn't, but I quickly ran down the hallway, got changed, and then spent the next, I think, almost 9 hours, right, well into, getting closer to midnight here in Canada, on CTV and global and doing some radio stuff, constant. And when it was all over, one of my friends who's very, very knowledgeable about the region and Turkey said to me, "Wow," he said, "your coverage you were actually being really very balanced," because I was flicking around on CNN and others, he told me, and it was almost as if they were rooting for the military. The announcers were saying this is a great thing, and of course, some news sites were implying that President at that time, Prime Minister Erdogan, had fled Turkey and whatnot. So, and I was trying to be balanced because I was reminding people, of course, of previous military coups and the aftermath of those coups, and of course, it was often a mess. And very difficult for what was happening, what then followed in Turkey. So yeah, trying to bring some balance. But it was 5 years ago, and here we are now. It's 2021, and I think over the 5 years, of course, a lot has happened. But what you continue to see are arrests of Gulen followers, not just people within Turkey, of course, and in the military still, but others that have been arrested in other countries and brought back to Turkey to stand trial. And I think that's really the story right now, because so many have gone to jail or have had their cases heard and the cases have been dismissed. But more and more Gulenists seem to be picked up every day. And in particular, I still see within the armed forces that you're having serving and retired, but more importantly, serving members of the armed forces continuing to be arrested for ties to the Gulen network. So here we are. It's 5 years later, and we're still talking about this, and we will continue to.
Do you think, I mean, you followed very closely, as I recall, the initial set of trials and the hearings that were held of the most prominent coup makers, we'll call them coup plotters. Is your sense that now these really are, if not big fish, really fish? I mean, they really were involved in the coup plot, people who are being rounded up now, or has it expanded to include anyone who has an association with Gulen, even if they had really nothing to do with the coup attempt?
Yeah, this is a tough story, I guess, to follow, because I think if you were in the United States or Canada and a portion of your armed forces, regardless of their alignment, regardless of their beliefs, but if a portion of the armed forces attempted to overthrow the government and you succeeded in quelling that and stopping it, you would then naturally begin to look for the followers of that particular group well after the fact, because they still pose a danger. Mm-hmm. Now, we're sitting over here in Canada and the United States, and we look at Turkey and we go, well, you know, the human rights record is very poor. A lot of journalists are in jail. We don't have a very favorable opinion of Turkey and its domestic policies and its regional policies. I mean, that's just a given. I mean, you see it in the press here. So we don't have a favorable opinion. But the fact is, though, if you were Turkish, if you were in the Turkish government, having gone through this coup, you would continue to look for who was behind it, whether they were directly involved or indirectly involved. Because, I mean, look, I mean, if you still got what you believe to be Gulen followers in the armed forces and other departments, etc., but in the armed forces, you're going to be concerned about what they might be up to down the road. Will they regroup? Will they do something to upset the day-to-day life? I mean, if you go back to, say, for example, 1962 and 63, and you look at Colonel Talat Aydemir, who staged 2 coups at that particular time, they were both unsuccessful, but they caused a disruption, as you saw soldiers fighting soldiers. And that reminds me that this coup that occurred in 2016 was unique in a number of ways, but it actually pitted soldiers against soldiers. Unlike what we saw, for example, in 1960 for the most part, 1971, 1980, 1997, you just didn't have that. But in 62, 63, you did have the armed forces squaring off against one another and putting an end to Aydemir's efforts. And you saw that again in 2016. But, you know, it's Turkey, and any wise Turkish politician would always be concerned about some element, however small, causing another disruption when you least need it in Turkey, when your inflation rate is running away, when your interest rates seem to be, you know, they should be climbing, but they're not, and the economy is very weak. That's what you don't need. You don't need another one of these disruptions. So I understand why they're doing it. But at the same time, of course, and we've spoken about this before, if you're in the armed forces in Turkey, and yesterday, and I mean, I'm talking like yesterday or last week, you see 2 of your colonels arrested, 2 of your lieutenant colonels arrested, several of your NCOs are being marched off, your non-commissioned officers and so forth. And you're in a unit or a brigade or some other higher formation. It just paralyzes the institution. Now, I'm sure if I had a Turkish military officer here who was serving in Turkey, they would tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, because everybody puts up a brave face. But the fact is, I've served in the military for 36 years here in Canada and overseas, and I'm telling you, it paralyzes the organization. You're so suspicious about who your colleagues are and what might happen next. So all of this is running underneath the surface.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to realize that that concern about the loyalty of your fellow soldiers may be, you know, increased dramatically, because we're talking about an institution that deals in lethality. It deals in using force when necessary, and it has the resources and the means to do so. But even in civilian life, if you're in any organization and you're seeing inexplicably people being fired, or the police coming in and arresting someone, and there's no explanation, and you really begin to wonder. So yeah, I was not in the military, but I did, as part of my government service with the State Department. I did a lot of interaction with military colleagues from the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think this is really, it's got to be debilitating. It has to be really bad for morale. The United States has its own issues, given the recent politics that took place in this country, but nothing anywhere near as bad as what took place 5 years ago. Now, but at this point, I think, we talked about this, let's say 6 years ago, the prospect of there being a coup again in Turkey. And my point was that the era of coups was over, and I was proved wrong. I should have temporized and said the era of successful coups, because, so let's ask that question. Is the era of successful coup making over in Turkey? Was there some threshold that was crossed by the response of the people of Turkey? Because overwhelmingly, the people of Turkey said no to the coup plotters.
Yeah, so in a lot of countries, when you think that you're out of this coup phase, we've actually seen a fair number of coups take place. Myanmar, Thailand, in Africa, of course, we still have them. After the 1960 coup, there were many analysts who looked at Turkey and said, well, that would be it, that wouldn't happen again. And the military was out of politics. And of course, they would pop up from time to time again, as we know, as I mentioned, like 1971. But of course, they were always there. The National Security Council had tremendous influence after the 1960 coup. It was put in place. I've mentioned before that if you look at Turkish presidents up until, I think, 1989, they were always four-star Turkish generals in civilian clothes, but clearly the military's presence was always there. It became a little lighter as time moved on, but even in 2003, 2007, with the military's note about Abdullah Gül potentially becoming president of Turkey, we've always seen that influence there. And so it sometimes falls away a little bit, but I'd still say you have, for example, the former chief of the general staff is the Minister of National Defense. You still have the Turkish military being a very preeminent security piece for Turkey at the moment, deployed in many, many countries throughout the region. And now discussions taking place about protecting the airport in Kabul in the long term. The military is still at the forefront. And I, from time to time, see articles where we have a Turkish admiral going to a religious event with his uniform covered with religious garb, which for many folks outside of Turkey, we'd think, well, okay, it's a bit strange, but okay. But in Turkey, of course, this is tremendous messaging or messaging taking place.
Right.
Either directly or inadvertently, let's say, but it speaks to various cliques that I would argue still exist in the Turkish military, and more so when the institution is under pressure and people do congregate together to find some solace amongst their with their peers. So I wouldn't say we're out of the woods. Would it be possible to see tanks rolling down the street? No, I would hesitate on that one, but I wouldn't be surprised if the armed forces, if they see an opportunity perhaps not today or tomorrow, but at some point to reassert themselves in a sort of 1997 manner.
Right.
We're unhappy with the way things are going because, I mean, look, if the economy was to go through what we saw in 2001 and things got really, really grim, and the AK party was to lose power, and then political parties in some sort of coalition begin not working together, and conditions get really, really, really poor in Turkey, you might see the military as that one institution still able to come out and say, look, I mean, this isn't working, and this is what you need to do. So this is an ongoing story in Turkey. This period that we have been through with 20 or so years of a government, one government in place is apart from the one party period way in the past, this is unique.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not last. And so we'll still see this turmoil occurring. And it's simply because, as a friend of mine who's Turkish said to me the other day, Turkish politics is built on a cycle of revenge. And nobody seems to be able to get out of that cycle. Now, when I look at Ekrem İmamoğlu in Istanbul and his campaign that he ran, it gives you some hope that his way, his being able to bridge between the sort of secular and the conservative elements in Turkey could be the way forward. You need more of that. Otherwise, I think we could be, carrying on the way we've seen in the past in Turkey.
Yeah, I mean, I think that observation about this cycle of vengeance is absolutely true, and I agree with you. Hopefully, İmamoğlu can be, if not him, in fact, it can't be just him. There has to be a consensus that starts to build, that you move away from this cyclical thing of revenge. And that's, I guess, one of my concerns is that, in the last 5 years, certainly it makes sense that the government would work to find anyone who was affiliated with the coup, or plotting it, planning it, giving it assistance, and to remove them from government or any sort of official position, particularly in the military. But has there been kind of the classic overreach that, in fact, the government over the last 5 years has been using allegations of being involved with the coup against political enemies, regardless of the veracity of those allegations?
Yeah, I think when you're facing an insurgency, for example, with the PKK,
Chris, I'm having trouble hearing you. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay,
there you go. That's better.
I think when a country like Turkey is facing an insurgency with the PKK, and when they've come through a coup attempt that of course failed, on only 5 years ago, and when you have elements in your country that are affiliated or are members of the Islamic State, it's easy for you to securitize everything. And I remember a quote from one of the coup leaders in 1960, after the coup had taken place. And he said, everything in Turkey is a security issue. If you're a close thinker, that's a security issue as well. And it spoke to the securitization of every aspect of Turkish life. And so if you're in the Turkish government and you are facing media outlets that are being critical, or people that are being critical, or academics who sign petitions, well, you can find some way to label them as having been under foreign influence, or members of FETÖ, or too close to the PKK. And of course, you can put that label on the HDP party as well and seek to get rid of them. It causes you to go down a really, really dark path. At the same time, of course, you're actually threatened by these issues. any kind of criticism, especially now because the Turkish government's position is fairly weak on a number of things, such as the economy. You do have a PKK threat, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, these are real issues. And for any government like the Turkish government, it's finding that very, very fine line that you can walk down where you allow a certain amount of press freedom, you allow people to criticize you, but you also have to think about your own national interests because the threats are actually quite real. You know, here in Canada, the United States, on a almost daily basis, we don't arrest members of the Islamic State that are hiding out in Mardin and other cities, Urfa and so forth. Now, of course, I'm sure some listeners will argue, well, the Turks brought that upon themselves by getting a little too close in many respects. But the fact is, it's 2021, and you have a threat inside your country. So it's a fine line. And the simple fact is that the Turkish government hasn't done a very good job of walking that fine line.
Yeah.
They have overstepped in many areas. They've tried to pull back in some, but the overall impression that you get is that no one can criticize the government. You can't make a Facebook post. Even on the Government of Canada website, if you look at the travel advisory for Turkey, and you look at what they'd say to you, they say to you, if you're a Canadian tourist and you're in Turkey, do not, for your own safety, post anything on Facebook that's critical of the Turkish government, because you could be deported at the very least, or face some kind of charge in a worst case scenario. So that kind of says it all as to where things stand and how the government has gone too far. And I don't think they're in a position to actually pull it back. They're even, you know, even with Pekar's videos criticizing Turkey, and we have the Turkish Democracy Project in Washington that has recently stood up and is now not just posting news from Turkey, but actually delivering their own letter. They sent a letter to Erdogan telling him to pull up his socks, and you're getting that criticism coming as well. So now, you know, you got a government that's entirely on the defensive position, and they are not going to budge.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and unfortunately, what that means is that that cycle of vengeance is likely to continue, because the elements, kind of, let's just call them the liberal elements of society, they will continue to be set upon, not because they're trying to overthrow the government, but because they're trying to have a dialogue, they're trying to raise concerns about failures managing the economy, et cetera, et cetera. But if all of that is seen as unfair criticism and the government reacts to it in a heavy-handed manner, then those kind of tolerant, moderate, liberal types start asking themselves, well, why should we continue to push forward this argument for tolerance and understanding when all it gets us is arrest on the most spurious of charges? It, you know, leads to protesters being, you know, gassed and hit with water cannon and so forth and so on. And these are peaceful protesters. These are not people who have links. And so it's difficult. I mean, how are they going to break this cycle? Because, you know, as you said earlier, they really do face some serious challenges on national security. The PKK has not gone away. They have a civil war in Syria, although that seems to have been tamped down greatly and is not nearly as threatening to Turkish national security as it used to be. You mentioned how they were kind of in bed, if that's a term one can say, with Islamic State, or of course, but with foreign fighters, you know, they did in 2014, 2015, 2016, they were looking the other way as these people were transiting through mainly, by the way, Sabiha Gökçen Airport, and then on down to the border.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, they do have a lot of problems. You just mentioned the Turkish Democracy Project, which is I think going through a kind of difficult birthing situation. A couple of its members had to I'm trying to figure out why, for example, Icon Erdemir, who was supposed to be on their board, resigned. He gave a very simple, plain, and unrevealing statement why he had resigned. One wonders what induced him, or who induced him to step down. But I'll try to figure that out. Do you see the Turkish Democracy Project as something that might be helpful to those democratic elements in Turkey that are feeling under pressure?
Well, I don't think so. Yes, I mean, the Turkish Democracy Project is bringing to the forefront all of the issues that are taking place in Turkey. But of course, we all know this. I mean, there are lots of people that talk about the issues that are occurring in Turkey. And I think what it does from the Turkish side, the Turkish government side, is they've had, I think, 7 extradition requests for Fethullah Gulen,
right?
Who they blame for being behind the coup attempt 5 years ago.
Right.
And then they see the Turkish Democracy Project, which arguably looks like it would be quite happy if Erdogan was to not be in power, if I can put that in a very nice way. And so they would just see this as the United States harboring their #1 terrorist that they want back, and then having this and wondering, what is America all about? So their position, of course, would be they'd be very upset. And of course, what we have seen are cyber attacks on the Turkish Democracy Project and death threats coming out of Turkey, and the Turkish Democracy Project has complained to President Erdogan about this. But it will serve a purpose, I suppose, in bringing a bit of discourse up. But it's also having.
Hello? Oh, I think we have a little technological gap here for a moment.
Yes, Turkey is very aggressive in the region, but let's remind ourselves. I'm just checking my internet here. We have to remind ourselves that it was the West that interfered in Libya. It was the West that caused many of the issues in Syria. It was the West that caused the disruptions in Iraq. So there's more to the story here. And when one organization puts out an unbalanced view of issues, I mean, of course they're correct. #2 jailer of journalists. Lots of people who have lost their jobs. I mean, there are aspects there, but when you set yourself up in one corner versus the other person in the other corner, then there's no middle ground to really have a discourse, and so it doesn't help. And we all know, Ed, that Turkey is loath to take any sort of criticism from foreigners or advice for that matter as well. Sadly, though, there is time when foreigners advising can be helpful, and it can help countries walk their way through certain situations. But I often don't see that in the case of Turkey, or at least I don't see it. Well, and can I just add here too that they're facing even more challenges now. And if you look at what's happening in Afghanistan with the withdrawal of the United States and NATO, and yes, the Kabul airport is up up for discussion about what to do with that. But the simple fact is, we're seeing more Afghans fleeing Afghanistan, coming through Iran, and according to the Ministry of the Interior, up to 500, maybe 1,000 Afghans are entering Turkey every single day right now. It seems difficult to believe that that those sorts of numbers are coming across. We know that there are about 500,000 Afghans in Turkey, but this is another issue that's going to put a strain on the country. So it just doesn't end. if you're sitting in Ankara, it just doesn't seem to end.
Yeah, I mean, Turkey has two things. One, it's hard for people to realize because they don't. I mean, it's hard for many Turks to realize that there are actually people who are sympathetic to the dire situation they face, and that simply because we're criticizing this particular action or that particular action, which really merits criticism. I mean, you know, going out and tear gassing everybody at a peaceful protest. I mean, come on. But at the same time, we also recognize that they do face really serious challenges: national security, economic problems, refugee flows. You just mentioned 500,000 Afghans in Turkey. I think people have lost count of the number of Syrians who are there. And by the way, the number of Iranians. There has been a steady trickle of Iranians fleeing the regime in Iran for Turkey for decades. And it kind of operates under the radar screen. Many of them, of course, are hoping to go further into Western Europe or into North America. But in fact, who knows how many, the short answer is, who knows how many it is. So you have economic issues, you have refugee issues, you have national security issues. They're all interrelated. And so, yeah, it's easy to see why sometimes, and yet what makes the news headlines in the West? Oh, you know, crackdown on journalists continues. I mean, that's, you know, and again, no one is apologizing for the Turkish government's bad actions against journalists or anyone else. It's just saying there needs to be a perspective. And I think what sometimes gets lost is on both sides, both in the West, there's a failure to understand and to really consider things from the Turkish perspective. And then in Turkey, there's a failure to understand that there actually are people who are sympathetic to the plight that Turkey, regardless of who the political leadership is, Turkey is going to still face very challenging situations. You know, Erdogan leaves office tomorrow, you know, resigns for health reasons or just go fishing or whatever. The challenges remain.
Yeah, and it always seems to me at the moment that everything's going in reverse, whether it's women's rights, the LGBT community being able to hold a parade and not being able to do that. Yes, I mean, there's this whole element of conservatism, but personal freedoms. I mean, these, and I know, you know, behind this, I don't think the government's, well, they, you know, because of the conservatism in the country, an LGBTQ parade in Istanbul is not seen as something that they want to have happen. But underneath it, of course, is any kind of demonstration or gathering of any sort is seen as a threat right now that could go out of hand and lead to another Gezi Park incident. And that's where we're at in Turkish politics.
And breaking it. I do want you to make a comment. You know, I remember when we were both in Ankara and we have a number of discussions about efforts by then Chief of the Army Staff, Hulusi Akar, and then later Chief of the General Staff, to really do some professionalization of the military and to reform it and, you know, really try to downsize it. Did the coup attempt stop those efforts, delay those efforts, or actually kind of give a little more impetus to those efforts to reform and professionalize the Turkish military?
You know, it's hard to reform and professionalize when you're on the run.
Right.
And what I mean by that is when you have to kind of withdraw within yourself because you've lost quite a number of your serving officers. Replacements have to be promoted, people that probably weren't going to be promoted. And so you got a lot of churn going on. And at the same time, the high schools were closed, the college training system was reformed, the health organization was moved over to the civilian side. I mean, there's been a lot, or bases were closed and units. I mean, there's a lot, and you had all of the conflicts that you were sending Turkish troops to in the region. So, yeah, there have been aspects of professionalization taking place, and a bigger reliance on contract soldiers. We know conscription has gone down to as little as 6 months now. And when I left in 2014, and I think it was in 2015 or 2016, I had an article in Turkish Review, which has been shut down because it was labeled a Gulenist article or a production magazine. I had an article in there talking about how, with the help of the European Union, Turkey had introduced a training program for conscripts to teach them about things such as women's rights, just human rights in general, some reading and writing aspects as well. It was more of it was like turning conscription into a social support system for young men to socialize them. But I don't really know at the moment what's happened with that program. But I did write about it quite extensively. And so that was kind of happening in that period as well. And so where are we today with the armed forces? Well, conscripts are still there, but they don't serve for that long. And many people buy out of their service if they can afford to do so. That creates a problem, of course, is because you end up having the soldiers that are probably the least educated and the poor who are having to do their 6 months of service, while the more affluent can not do it. That creates social divisions right there within the country. But I mean, if you look at what the Turkish Armed Forces intent would be, it would be, I think, to move away from conscription at the end of the day and continue to professionalize. And you need to, because the military's equipment in Turkey is becoming more and more sophisticated every single day. And you need very, very intelligent people, young soldiers, etc., to do this work. You know, will we ever see more women in the Turkish armed forces than we do now? That's another issue that the country should probably think about. But I would say this is an organization that's still in a good deal of churn.
Right.
And I would love to be on a fly on the wall with Yasar Güler, who I hosted in Canada Day in 2014, to really have some insight as to the challenges that they are facing today.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up. I just did want to mention that the former senator from the state of Arizona, Jeff Flake, it was recently announced that he was being nominated to be the ambassador to Turkey from the United States. I just wanted to observe, it's fascinating that announcement came out just a couple days before the 5-year anniversary of the coup attempt. I don't know whether that matters or not, or it's simply, who knows. But I did a little looking into retired Senator Flake's background. There really has none in the Middle East that I can find. He was like all members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, AKA the Mormons. He did his missionary work. I understand it was in Southern Africa, I think South Africa and Zimbabwe. He reportedly learned Afrikaans. Maybe not the best language to use in Zimbabwe. Would have been better to know Shona or Ndebele. But certainly useful in South Africa, depending who he was trying to bring into the fold. And then he also, when he was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he focused on Africa, which made sense. He had been a missionary there for his church, so he had a lot of familiarity. It's the other interesting element to it is that it is the first time in many years that a non-career foreign service officer is going out as ambassador to Turkey. The current ambassador, David Satterfield, who is just phenomenal, in my opinion. He was preceded by John Bass, career Foreign Service officer, who was preceded by Frank Ricciardoni, career Foreign Service officer, who was preceded by Jim Jeffrey, career Foreign Service officer. All of them who had long and distinguished careers. I mean, I'm less familiar with John Bass than the others, but I expect that all of them had multiple ambassadorships, which is quite an accomplishment in our foreign service to get multiple ambassadorships. I mean, you really have to be quite at the top of the game.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of having lunch with Ambassador Bass in 2016 in Ankara on a visit there, unexpectedly. But I had a chance to talk about Turkey and go on and on and on like I do. And I've always been impressed by the ambassadors, some of them that you've mentioned, who had been in Turkey before, various capacities, and actually spoke Turkish and could sort of get a much better feel for what was happening in the moment. It's a challenge when you do send someone in there that doesn't know Turkey and doesn't know the region, and they're always playing catch up in some respects. Fortunately, as you know from being there, the embassy's organization is quite massive compared to the Canadian embassy, and you have the resources to draw on. So it's not the worst situation to have, but I think compared to what's happened with the ambassadors in the past, it's a big change.
Yeah, it's going to be. I mean, it'll be worth watching. I'm sure he'll do fine. I mean, he will be. I'm sure they will see to it that he gets a really good deputy, and then also the counselors at that, the next step down from the deputy level. They will be, highly competent and running it. But it is, I guess there's going to be some Sovietology, as we used to call it, of analyzing what is the message from the Biden administration to President Erdogan by sending a retired kind of sort of Republican but endorsed Joe Biden in the 2020 election person. Yeah. I think it has far less to do with Turkey, by the way, than with U.S. domestic politics. But
yeah, but I mean, look, around the world, where are some of the hottest? I'm not talking literally, but the hottest capitals to be in these days: Moscow, Beijing, and then I would think Ankara. This is places where things are happening and where real policy problems are occurring, not just Turkey but regionally. These are critical places to have someone there that can report back and give the advice to government. One of the voices, of course, but an important one nevertheless. So yeah.
I don't know. It's I of course have my biases by being a retired career Foreign Service officer that I would rather see for the real. I get it. Sometimes you're going to get a political appointee, but I just hope they really. I believe they will. They will get him the support staff to make sure he's successful. But the places you mentioned, for example, and the fact, what you mentioned was that many of the recent previous ambassadors of the United States to Ankara have been there on their second assignment, and they knew Turkish and they knew Turkey well, in a place that's as vitally important as Turkey is. And it's vitally important. It's a blessing and a curse, and it's its geography. I mean, one of the reasons it's going to get a lot of Afghan refugees, and it's gotten Iranian refugees and Syrian refugees and Iraqi refugees, is because it's still a crossroads, as it has been for, 3,500 years.
Yeah.
Crossroads of empires.
So
Yeah,
but if I can quickly finish,
sure.
So what I'm gathering is that if Ambassador Flake is to watch our podcasts, he'll be very well prepared.
Absolutely. In fact, I might write to him and say, in preparation for your Senate confirmation hearings, here's a little bit of advice.
Yeah.
And in all seriousness, I think it would help him. Okay, Chris, thanks very much. Take care. I will definitely have you back. Couple weeks, 3 weeks, because though it has been a little bit of the doldrums in Turkey's relations with the West, I think things have been, for different reasons, kind of quiet over the last few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
No one expects things to remain quiet in Turkey for very long.
No, never.
All right, take care.
Thank you, Ed. Take care.
Right.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here, for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.